Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Sabiha Rahman.
And I'm Walter Ruby.
I am an American Muslim.
And I'm an American Jew.
And we refuse to be enemies.
We certainly do. So nearly 7 years ago, at the end of 2017, I received a call from an organization I'd never heard of before called Project Rozana, that I was told focused on building bridges between Israelis and Palestinians through the provision of quality healthcare to both communities. And the Project Rozana team, USA team, headed by its President Ken Bob, who we all know and love, I guess Ken had been aware that I had worked for years in Muslim-Jewish relations, and since they were doing a tour, they were bringing an Israeli and Palestinian doctor who were involved in Project Rozana work over to the States. They wanted to see if they could get, if I could help them bring the program to a mosque in Virginia. I live in the greater Washington area, because mostly until that time, it had just the work of bringing the story of Project Rozana to America was mainly within the Jewish community. So it happened that when Ken asked me to do this, I said, "Oi, this is not the best moment, perhaps, because the Trump administration had just recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and obviously the American Muslim community was not happy about that and was not in the mood to sort of, promote quote unquote good news from Israel." But I was able to convince one of the largest mosques in Virginia to host the visiting Rozana team. And once the members of the mosque, some of them may have come in kind of with a chip on their shoulder, but when they heard the doctors, and especially a Palestinian woman oncologist, Quadril Salami, talk about her work and her enhanced ability to save the lives of Palestinian children with cancer because of training she was receiving at a hospital in Israel, it really impacted them because it was really brought up that idea of saving life as the sacred goal, and this was happening and through Project Rozana, and so it really, I think, melted my hearts and said, that's more important than the politics, essentially. And in terms of, so since that time, I think that was maybe a kind of turning point. We've been able to bring the message of Rozana to the States, both to the Muslim community as well as the Christian community and the Jewish community. So it's really been wonderful to be part of that. And I've been working with Rozana now for all these years, largely in a consulting role. And I was privileged to take part in 2 Rozana board missions to Israel and Palestine in 2020 and then in 2022 to see, first of all, the wonderful programs that the 2 of you are going to tell us about, and even more importantly, meet the inspirational people who make it happen. I have to say that my connection with Rozana has been I feel like it's a gift, that I've had this chance to kind of reconnect with Israel and Palestine through Rozana, and to just to witness, to be part of in some small way, the really holy work that you do in terms of life-saving. And even when times are at their worst, or maybe even especially when times are at their worst, as is happening right now, worst of all, I think, with the absolutely horrendous war in Gaza and the violence in the West Bank. But as you'll tell us today, Rozana's work continues despite all of that. And I think that ultimately it's a story about keeping hope alive that people everywhere need to hear. So.
And 2 of those wonderful people who make Rozana function are with us here today. Rozana CEO Ronit Zimmer and its Director of Advocacy, Mohammad Asideh. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Ronit and Mohammad.
Thanks for having us.
So Ronit and Mohammad, can each of you share something of your biography and what brought you to the work of Rozana International?
Okay, I'll start.
I think, I don't know, I was a teenager during Oslo, and I still think about it today, because I still think that 30 years ago, we could have had a peace agreement, and all of the lives that have been lost in the last 30 years, we just could have been living in a different reality. And I understand that there were issues, but I still think about it almost every minute of the day. So I think, I was, 30 years ago, 15, 16, a teenager during the Oslo period. I ended up studying law. I wrote my thesis on the constitutional laws as they relate to women in Israel and women in Palestine. I looked at the basic law and the draft basic law. And from there, I just kind of continued on this journey of trying to get to know the other. I was brought up in a house that was open, that had the core value being respect. And I hope that I'm bringing up my children in the same way, that they just see everybody that's in front of them with respect, regardless of where they come from or what their background is.
Thank you. Thank you. Ronit and Mohammad?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in the West Bank, very small community, around 5,000 people. But I've been always passionate about football. So that was the first thing I wanted to do when I was still a kid. But then the second intifada started, 2000, which is the uprising against the military occupation here in the West Bank and Gaza as well. And I found myself really drawn into political activism at the age of 12. So I almost joined every demonstration in the city and in my town, and there were lots of them. So that's how I spent most of my time back then. And it was just natural that I studied political science in Palestine, and then I worked in Washington at some point in my career as well. It was a very interesting experience. I've learned so much. That was before I moved to Singapore to study public policy. After my studies, I came back to Palestine, and I worked here for 4 years. I got married during that time. I had a baby, and I tried to be part of the reforming institutions here. 4 years, I didn't feel at the end I was really achieving the goals I came back for. We left to Australia, and my wife did her master's there. We spent 2 years almost, and then the October 7th happened, the war started, and we moved back to Palestine. And we're here now. We are based in Ramallah, so I'm speaking to you from Ramallah.
Wow, that's quite a story. So Rozana is now 11 years old. Tell us about its origin story and why it is named Rozana.
Rozana was a little girl. She was 4, and she fell off the balcony of her 9th floor apartment in a village just outside of Ramallah. Her mother is from East Jerusalem, and she was able to contact Hadassah and have Rozana treated at Hadassah in the emergency room at Hadassah, and her life was saved. Today she's 15-year-old, beautiful teenager. So our founder, Ron Finkel, who's Australian, he heard about this story, and he thought about the cooperation that would have taken place between the Israeli and the Palestinian authorities in order to save Rozana's life. He thought about the transportation coordination. He thought about the treatment that she received at Hadassah. And most importantly, he wondered why she wasn't able to be treated in the hospital in Ramallah. Where were the gaps in the health system that made her actually think, I'm going to send her to Hadassah rather than to the hospital, the local hospital. And that really lays the groundwork of the kind of work that we do. Treatment, transportation, and mostly training or capacity building or health development, as we call it.
Thank you.
So thanks for that, Ronit. And so I guess you've kind of laid it out when you talked about the treatment, training, and transportation. I was going to ask you about how Rozana evolved from its early years after Ron started this wonderful thing. And how did it kind of build up to what it is today, where you're getting, international grants from agencies like USAID and the European Union, as well as private sources, obviously. And you now have an on-the-ground staff in Israel, Palestine that is truly binational. Maybe you could give us a little sense of the evolution.
And Mohammad, do you want to respond, and then I'll finish up?
No, please go ahead. I think you have a better idea on the development of the organization.
So we really did initially focus on, we supported some initiatives, transportation, volunteer drivers. We had volunteer drivers, Israeli volunteer drivers taking Palestinian patients. We had an organization, a Palestinian organization with Palestinian drivers also working together with the Israeli volunteer drivers. We supported capacity building initiatives. We worked together with Augusta Victoria and Asuta Ashdod in a nephrology project. We worked together with Alin and with Princess Basma on a pediatric rehabilitation project. And we kind of focused really in the early years on these very, small scale projects that had a beginning point and an end point. And then at some point, the board came together and said, okay, we're starting to get some traction. We're entering this period of COVID. We have to work together because the diseases know no borders. How are we going to do this what are we going to do? How are we going to scale this? And I actually was a volunteer at the time. I was working in Rozana, Israel as a volunteer. And they approached me and said, would you like to work professionally in the organization? And let's see how we can start to build relationships, understand the needs, and then move projects forward. And I said, yes, that was at the end of 2020. So really when COVID hit. And we ended up creating a ventilator campaign where we were able to donate something like 40 non-invasive ventilators to Palestine and to the different public hospitals throughout Palestine. And that really kind of opened the door for us. We became a legitimate organization. And after that, we started to really engage with other hospital partners in Palestine, hospital partners in Israel, understand needs, and start to identify where the gaps were and what we could do in a collaborative manner to address these gaps. So with that kind of evolution, we were able to raise funds, as Walter said, from USAID for an extensive nursing program that engages 500 nurses cross border. It has language component. Israelis are learning Arabic. Non-Arabic speaking Israelis are learning Arabic. Palestinians are learning Hebrew. They're both learning English. They're engaged in a personal, professional process. It's really peace building, really. They're doing it together. We've now, since the war started, added in a resilience component. I mean, so, that is a USAID funded project. We have been working with Israeli and Palestinian psychologists, which was funded by the EU. We've been working now with FCDO, which is the British Foreign Ministry. They've helped us. They partners with us with our Women for Women program, which I'd love to speak about afterwards too. A Jerusalem palliative care program where we had 5 Jerusalem hospitals working together to really understand the needs in end-of-life care and learn together, new skills, which is an evolving field, certainly in Palestine, but also in Israel too.
Wow, that's a lot. Let me just ask one other quick thing, which is that Ronit, one of the fascinating things about Project Rozana from the beginning was this whole volunteer component. I mean, so obviously there was a lot of work with doctors and nurses on both sides, but somehow you had people who were able to volunteer from both the Israeli and Palestinian side. For example, with a program like Wheels of Hope. Maybe you could talk just a little about that and how that volunteer component has also really helped to bring people from both sides together.
Yeah, Wheels of Hope was always about volunteers, Palestinian volunteers taking Palestinian patients who need to cross the border either to the East Jerusalem hospitals or to the Israeli hospitals for specialized treatment. And then on the other side of the border, the Israeli volunteers. I mean, this continues. This is even throughout the war. we've got volunteers 6 days a week working to bring Palestinian children mostly and their families across the border to either the East Jerusalem or the Israeli hospitals. And it as Walter said, Rozana started off as a volunteer organization. We didn't have any professional capacity, actually. We had, we had boards around the world, plus we had volunteer drivers, plus we had, volunteer experts who came in and provided some capacity training. And then it's now evolved into a much more professional gig, which has been part of our evolution. But the heart of it is the volunteerism, really. And I mean, no, we're not here to cultivate volunteerism. We really are here to address gaps and do it together, Israelis and Palestinians. But it's been one of the beautiful, outcomes of our projects.
Yeah, certainly has. And we understand that Rozana has adopted the term health diplomacy as its credo. What is the meaning of that term?
Yes, well, it's a very good question, actually, and people have different understanding of it. But it's really the use of diplomatic tools in the field of health to build relations between different communities. And in some cases, those communities, it's not just between Palestinians and Israelis, but also I've seen it in the US, for example, where when a black man is treated by a white man or the other way around, it really changes the perspective or the narrative of two different ethnic groups, or between two different groups who grow up with stereotypes sometimes about what the other really thinks about or what values they stand for, and they don't speak with each other for so long. And at some point, when there is that situation and interaction, they start to realize how much in common they have, and that when someone is in need, the other shows up for him or her. It's them in conflict, and I think doctors are the first ones who pay the price and take on the burden of political failures. Wherever there is a political failure, there are people who are here. And usually the doctors and nurses are there to deal with the outcome of this political failure. And sometimes it's political failure, sometimes it's policy failure. So, for example, gun violence in the US, there are so many people who are victims of that. And whether that's a policy failure or whatever, it's a controversial issue in the US, but there are people who are affected by that policy, and a change in policy would sometimes save lives. In Australia, they have stricter laws and regulations on guns, but that saved lives as well. So that's in simple terms. So what we're really trying to do is to highlight those situations where Palestinians and Israelis are sometimes really treated by the other side, and what impact that leaves on them. And there are incredible stories on that from health. But also what Rozana tries to do is to improve or to be part of improving policy. So doctors don't really have to deal with policy failure anymore. Right. And they're part of it. They are the ambassadors who speak that, and what Rozana does is really just give them the platform.
I'll add that we have like a 3-track diplomacy. So we work at the institutional level, where we are creating relationships between Israeli and Palestinian medical institutions. We work at the professional level, where we're creating really networks of health professionals. And then we work at the grassroots, where there's, improved outcomes for patients, and that this interaction that Mohammad is talking about between the patient and the practitioner. I'll just give you an example of today. Today we had 25 doctors and nurses from Al-Maqassid, which is an East Jerusalem hospital, going to Sheba Medical Center in Ramat Gan, just outside of Tel Aviv, for ECMO training. So ECMO became like quite fashionable and a word everybody knew during COVID, because it simulates lungs. Now, this initiative, this is a 4-day intensive program. It was initiated by one of our fellows. So we also have a pediatrician from Maqassid who is doing her doing her fellowship at the pediatric ICU at Sheba, she undertook the course, and she thought it would be so wonderful if her fellow physicians and nurses from her referring hospital would do the same. So we were able to really bring, this kind of idea of the multi-track diplomacy together, even just today. You had two hospitals working together. You had, the practitioners working together. And it was really all the initiative of this wonderful pediatrician who is working today in Israel and will go back to East Jerusalem and to her hospital and provide the best care she can for Palestinian children.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
So, Ronit, you mentioned Women for Women as one of the programs you wanted to touch on, and maybe I think if you could do that, and maybe one or two others that you think are really important, that really exemplify those relationships that you talked about, professional and personal.
Again, it was during COVID when Rozana undertook a feasibility study, and we looked at the women living in the remote villages of the West Bank in Area C, in occupied Area C of the West Bank, to see what their level of access to healthcare was. And we saw that it was almost zero. There were so many political and cultural barriers to these women receiving healthcare. And we kind of discussed how is it that we can deliver healthcare where it was appropriate, culturally sensitive, the right kind of healthcare, and supported by clinicians, and as well still living within our health diplomacy mission. And we've now worked together with a Hebron-based organization, Greenland Society for Health Development. Together with Greenland, we've trained a group of 10 young Palestinian health practitioners, but a multidisciplinary team, because we decided we can't just think about reproductive health, or we can't just think about primary health care. We really need to take a holistic look at what women need. So our team has a gynecologist, our team has a GP, it has 2 nurses, a midwife, a nutritionist, a physiotherapist, and a psychologist. And each week they go into 6 different villages. They're being supported by Sheba Beyond. Sheba Beyond is Sheba Medical Center's virtual hospital. They've got a women's innovation center where they've invested in tech, where you can have real-time clinical supervision. So we could have the midwife using with the ultrasound on a pregnant woman in the field in Area C, in Idna, for instance, in one of the villages, and have Hadil, who is the gynecologist at Sheba, being able to speak also to the midwife, but also to the patient, all in real time. So this was the kind of ecosystem we decided would be optimal. And we've enhanced that with different preventive educational lectures. We talk about nutrition for children. We've provided the women first aid courses. Even since the beginning of the war, there was this kind of need amongst the women in the communities that they want to protect their children. So we delivered a first aid course, or the team delivered the first aid course, I should say. And we're looking now at doing an advanced course too. I'll just add that the model works so well, being able to have a remote clinic or a mobile clinic in the remote areas, that we're now working with an organization called Lanera, which is actually an American organization, but with boots on the ground in Gaza. And they are providing similar services now, together with Rozana, inside of Gaza, inside of the IDP camps and shelters. So again, a tent clinic with a team of 6 or 7 practitioners providing primary and reproductive health care to some of those blessed souls who are really victims of a brutal war.
So speaking of the war, how has the eruption of the widespread violence that has occurred after October 7th impacted the work of Rozana International?
I'll speak just at the practical level, and then maybe Mohammad will speak at the political level. At the practical level, most of our programs have actually continued. You know, we had a slight pause, let's say Women for Women, pause for a week or two, but because it's, you know, it's inside of the West Bank, supported virtually, we were able to continue. The transportation continued. There was almost no stop on the transportation. We had a minibus that was going to Erez Crossing, which bringing patients. We had 2 buses a day actually coming in with patients from Gaza that were coming in every single day. We obviously had to pivot that, and we've resumed minibus services to the West Bank, mostly to the south in the Hebron region. We had to kind of re-envisage our very extensive nursing program. Instead of bringing Palestinian nurses to the Israeli hospitals, to the departments, we're now actually focusing on medical simulation-based training, which we're doing at Ben Gurion University. But, you know, in a way, there was something very positive about that, because the clinical work that they were doing at the Israeli hospitals was very observational. Once you get into a simulation center, you can get your hands dirty and you really can learn. And we add in a whole sustainability bit where they become instructors themselves and can go back. So we have had to make a few adaptations. Obviously, very challenging dynamics at the beginning, which nothing changed, but there's still challenge. But there, you know, I think, and I'll be very honest about this, our team is just so extraordinary. Like Mohammad and our teammates, the resilience and the desire to help, and the desire for peace, and the desire to work together has been so strong that when you're working together and we have each other, you know, nothing is impossible. So we just kept going, and then, you know, every little obstacle we were able to get over in terms of participants and in terms of the relationships with the hospitals. Mohammad could speak at the more political level because he's more involved in the policy and advocacy work. So I'll let Mohammad speak, but that is at the practical project level. It's really been our extraordinary team that has enabled everything to just continue. We even had 3 fellows start in Israeli hospitals in January. So you're talking about the height of the war. There was still enough trust and there was still enough desire to improve skills and to be able to bring them back to our own communities and be able to provide better care.
That is remarkable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, first thing, it really, the impact was personal. The first thing, it really impacted every one of us personally. I remember the first call I had with Ronit after October 7th, and you know how hard that is. And I'm sure everyone in this field, you know, questioned the need to continue. But then you really realize that, you know, we aren't doing this because we are best friends. And sometimes, you know, we do have our political disagreements and differences, and even among the doctors, even among, you know, Palestinians themselves, we have our disagreement, just like any other society. I mean, the US now, the polarization is huge, right? So imagine here in Palestine and Israel. But the question is always really, what's the alternative? And I think the alternative would be is to leave the field for the radicals, for the extremists, and then to think about the future. How would that look like if really we leave the battlefield for the extremists? And that would be a disaster for us, for our families. The first thing, and you know, and as I said, I left Palestine because I thought the situation was bad, but then I came back when it was, you know, a real war. And every time we tried to leave, there was the time when I left to the US, I came back, left Singapore, I came back to Australia, and I came back. This time was more pressured by my wife to come back, I think. But we always believed that we could contribute to being part of the solution. And we're doing what we are doing because we know it works. We know this change will happen. And at one point, 20 years probably from now, we'll look back and we know we've been part of something great, and we've been part of the change, and that we didn't give up when it was the worst of time. And I think what you have in Palestine and Israel now is leadership on the local level, not on the political or the senior level. Those are the leaders that you will find in health institutions. Politicians, it's a nightmare, to be honest, here, even though they should have been the ones who keep the hope alive. And I think now the people who are doing that are the doctors. And again, they're not doing it because it's easy, or they just enjoying it because they know the alternatives are not there. And I think the change really happened, and the magic happens when people realize they don't really have a plan B. Because plan B is just a total disaster, and there's so much opportunity in moving forward in cooperation and in working together. And that will be, what I'm saying will be very controversial, because we know that there are people who are trying to win the argument, and especially in the West. And when I was in Australia, I've seen how every pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, they were trying to win arguments in the first place. Of course, they care about their societies. But I felt, it was an attempt really to win the argument, that rather than really looking for a solution. And for us, those are really not winning the arguments. We want to win the war, and winning the war means peace, where everyone could really live in peace. So my daughter could grow up here in peace, because that's her country. I don't have any other passport. The only passport I have is Palestinian. Happy with it. It doesn't take you places, but still, I'm very proud of my passport, and I want my daughter to be the same. She will blame me. Hopefully, she won't blame me one day that we decided to go back to Palestine after Australia. But the meaning of this work is really the impact on the people, on the personal level. Ronit's story, my story, is the story of every Palestinian in the region, every Israeli who are there, and those are the majority of the people, by the way. Let's not be distracted by opinion polls, all the news, and so on. The majority of the people, what they really want is an end to this miserable situation, and to start building the region again, or at least those two countries, and move forward for a better future.
And that is so hard to do, and but so necessary. Yeah.
When I think about the polarization, I think about the polarization between the us, the rational, the peace-wanting people, and them being the radicals, not the polarization between Israelis and Palestinians, or Jews and Muslims, but between the majority, the rational majority, versus the radicals who will do anything just to destroy something that could be really, really good. You're talking about two wonderful communities that could work together and make it even better here.
Very true.
Ronit, I know in this context of how to discuss the conflict, post October 7th, and in terms of some of the programs that you're doing, that you developed, or that Rozana developed a pilot program in the nursing hub, I believe, designed to enhance understanding of the other. So can you tell us a little about that? And is that having a kind of an effect that helps to motivate people to work together from both sides?
Okay, so I'll start with what happened last year in the nursing hub. Last year in the nursing hub, we had this. We had a number of components. I talked about them. We had the language, we had the clinical, we had the sustainability, and we had the peace building. And I'm just going to make my screen a bit lighter. And what we did is we did this amazing training of trainers in positive peace. And then it was something like 40 Palestinian and Israeli nurse leaders that we brought together at the Dead Sea. And then together in their twinned hospitals. So when I say the twinned hospitals, we had, one in Tel Aviv and one in Ramallah, one in Ashdod and one in Beersheba, one in Ashdod and one in Hebron. And we had the two Jerusalem hospitals, and together they implemented a peace building program, right? And it was amazingly successful. The clinical work was amazingly successful. They were all together every single week for 6 months or 9 months. And the program finished on the 30th of September. Come October 7, and there's no dialogue. And we kind of tried to think about, why is this the case? You know, they've come together, they've been together for week on week, done this positive piece. And I think that there was so much fear, and there was so much anger, and there was so much misunderstanding, that we thought positive peace, or looking at what we have in common and how to do things together in the future, is just not enough, right? We've got to go back, right? We've got to look at each other's histories. We've got to look at the Nakba. We've got to look at Jewish persecution and the need for a safe haven for Jews. And everybody needs to understand where the other is coming from, because otherwise this cumulative trauma, which exists in our region everywhere, right, creates fear, creates violence, creates fear, creates violence, and we get stuck in this cycle of violence like we're seeing today. So we've started this a new approach, where we're bringing in education, we're bringing in very much more in-depth personal resilience work, well-being, and then much more in-depth peace building, of really getting to know the other, of really looking at each other's histories, the histories that inform our identities, the history that has created this situation on the ground here, which we really believe can be reversed if given the opportunity. And it's starting in the next few weeks. We have 20 amazing Israeli and Palestinian nurse leaders, very intensive program where they will be face-to-face, online, and then 10 days in Switzerland together for a very intensive program.
Wow, so that's coming up. Okay.
That's coming up.
Okay.
And before that, we've got this ECMO program that we have for the nurses and the doctors this week. We're starting a 10-week program on diabetes care together with the Palestine Diabetes Association. So we really got lots of activities, bringing in the clinical, but also bringing in this idea of getting to know each other beyond okay, so we both know how to, you know, do some clinical work. We've really got to get to understand one another.
So, Ronit and Mohammad, how does Rozana role model the ethos of a shared Israeli-Palestinian future in the land between the river and the sea?
Thank you. You know, if it's a political question, I think the answer would be really two independent states living in peace side by side. It's as simple as that. And also, I think the challenge with this question is really depends on when do you ask it? Like what time frame in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? Because there were times where, you know, people were very optimistic, and I think now we have a really low starting point for Palestinians and Israelis start thinking about the future and to start building. I wouldn't say together. And I think, you know, when people hear the word shared, they think, you know, living together and building everything together. It's not that. It's just, you know, letting people live, letting people build, letting people practice their culture, their religion, you know, in peace. And sometimes that means separation. To have like a shared future is really a separation, to have a better future. And I think that's where we need to really start at. When people think about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, they always think about politics. Politics is, you know, it's a political conflict. A big part of it is politics, but also a big part of it are policies. But if you look at it, it's really composed of different policies. There's the economic policy that Palestinians and Israelis have to deal with, because there is exchange of, you know, economic affairs. There's shared religious sites as well, not just between Muslims or Palestinians and Israelis, but between billions of people around the world. The cultural, education, health, and so many other areas of cooperation, where I think a better future is where Palestine and Israel become a reason for people to come together, rather than conflicts. I know this might seem naive, but I think, all those ideas, the great ideas throughout history, started as naive ideas. Now we are not starting. We do have an experience where there were attempts to make peace, and even where they weren't really so successful, they made the situation better for the people. And then when a society is ruled by ideology, that's where really the destruction happens. And there are so many examples throughout history where nations that followed ideology didn't end up well for them, unfortunately, because really ideology is looking into your own interests versus the world's. But in today, especially in our globalized world, where really a shared interest, that's what makes the world better. I've lived in the US, and I've seen how those globalized values have changed the world. I lived in Australia and in Singapore, and I know that Singapore is what it is now because it opened its doors to the people, treated everyone equally. And I think instead of looking at it politically, we need to look at the values we really share and we care about. And yes, it does start with politics, but even a political solution wouldn't solve the conflict. And that's what you are saying here. That's the role of civil society. The role of civil society is not to provide health services in the first place, but to empower the institutions to provide better services to the people. And that's actually the main mission of Rozana. But the second part is really to highlight the importance of awareness, as Ronit was saying. My last point on this, 3 months ago, I met with a great Irishman. He was part of the negotiations team in the Good Friday. And when I asked him, how did that deal happen? Why did it happen at the end? And he said, there were two main factors here. The first one is that politicians who were involved, or the negotiators, get to know the other one on the personal level and to develop this relationship. And you have people who start to understand where the Irish people are coming from and why they demand what they are demanding. But the second one, because we have strong civil society that run huge campaigns trying to show the importance of a deal. And I think that's the huge job or even burden on the civil society in Palestine and Israel, to deal with so many issues, but also to focus on the importance of a shared future, as you called it.
Right. So what you're saying, Mohammad, is that you see two states as the future, but two states interconnected, and I think what Rozana is doing in terms of role modeling how that interconnection would be about, and how whatever border is there would be possible to transcend, and people coming together and working together on both sides of the border and all the rest of it. So anyway, it's just really a beautiful vision. And I guess moving on, Ronit, you started to talk about this new initiative in Gaza, the mobile tent healthcare initiative with ANERA. And I'm just wondering, I mean, when we're all very excited to learn more about it, and perhaps other ideas in Gaza. There was talk of building a children's village in northern Gaza. Whatever you can tell us about it at all, but it all sounds so like, really, you can do something in Gaza in the midst of this, horrendous situation and this, extreme violence. And how will the, for example, the mobile tent care initiative work amidst the, this, life-threatening violence for the healthcare workers, as well as obviously the people that are being treated?
I think that there are areas where there are humanitarian areas where it's more civilized than it looks in the news, and those are the areas, and particularly in the underserved shelters, is where ANERA's team is going to be providing, or is already providing, healthcare, particularly primary care and reproductive care, healthcare. the aim is to provide 20 healthcare days a month, care to about 6,000 patients. We're hoping to be involved in the second round of the polio vaccination campaign. At the moment, they're going through the first round, and the team, the ANERA team, will get involved in the second dosage of the polio vaccination. They're vaccinating, I think it's something like 500,000 children under the age of 10. So I think that there are areas that are much more quiet, that there aren't military forces, that it is just civilians, and quite a bit of international aid organizations that are providing aid. How can I tell you? It's very difficult.
But
I'm happy that Rozana can be part of it, and in fact I'm so touched that Rozana can be part of it, and we're looking at providing other added value services through the team on the ground. I can't speak about here, but hopefully we'll be able to share soon.
So outside critics, especially on the left, charge that Rozana and similar people-to-people initiatives are about normalizing the occupation, like putting a band-aid on a tumor. Can you respond to that, please?
Sure, Tabiha. Thanks for the question, for highlighting this issue. I think it's an important issue. Now, I really don't understand the accusation much of how, I think most of the organizations in the peace building in Palestine talk about two things. The need to end the military occupation, but also to reach an agreement where both sides could win and live in peace. The Israelis want security, they get it. Palestinians want a state, they get it. I think there are 2 points here. Well, first, I think it's great that we have that kind of diversity of opinions. A healthy society should have different opinions. People who support Rozana, people who are very critical of the work, and they express that. And to us, that's always, sometimes they could be right about something that we could improve, and we do that. So it's always really a great asset. And I think most of the organizations, even companies and politicians, we should appreciate the diversity of opinions, have conversation with the critics and engage with them. They might have a better approach or some suggestions of how to improve that work. If that's the case, so how to do the work better is really the question that we usually ask. I think some critics are really come from a place where a place of ideology, and I think it's been said before that the more the society drifts from truth, the more it hates those who speak. Sometimes the critics are for good reasons. Sometimes it serves an ideology that's not the best interest of the majority of the people. And what Rozana is focused on is serving the interest of the Palestinians and the Israelis. Yes, again, I think the critics to us is just feedback. And where it's appropriate, I think that's a place where we look into that, we discuss it internally, we try to improve and to improve our work. And yes, I would love also to see more opinions on the work of Rozana and many organizations in this field. I think that's really the way we build an inclusive society, that people could express their ideas freely, be heard, and just not being labeled as haters or whatever, or supporters. So it's not really the labeling that we're looking for, but to serve everyone, even those who criticize our work. I think at some point they will be served by the doctors themselves who are involved in Rozana. And I think that's how you really show love, even to those who don't agree with you or support your work. But it is definitely, it's not easy. It does affect the work. It does make some people fear for, for their role. But what we see is, there are more and more people who are willing to take the risk to say what needs to be said, even in times as difficult as the ones we are in right now.
That's so moving. I just wanted to share. Recently, I had the privilege to interview several of the members of the Women for Women staff, and basically, I asked them, "What gives you the strength to get up every morning and go and really do something that could be a bit dangerous, because they have to drive in their minivan out of Hebron, and they have to go to remote villages that, I guess, even before the war started, before October 7th, it took an hour to get there, but now with roadblocks by the IDF and sometimes by the settlers, it could take 3 hours. And, you're in many cases, I remember I was talking to one woman, a young mother, and, is this safe for you? And she kind of said just what you said, Mohammad, that there is no plan B, and I have to get up and I have to do this. And it's not easy every day. And so I wanted to share that, and then segue into the last question, which is, do either of you ever despair on the bad days, and what picks you up, and how does the collective, the staff of the larger, you and the rest of the staff and the volunteers and others who are so involved, you're involved with every day, maintain together? How do you keep struggling for that dream of peace and equality, with access to health care as a human right for all the people of Israel and Palestine?
Yes, the answer is yes. You have days that are hard. This week has been hard. But I really feel inspired by our team. Our team, I said it before, our team is just so dedicated, and we're there for each other. So as Mohammad said, we don't always agree with everything. We don't always agree with every political perspective, but we are there for one another, and we keep each other together, and we keep each other motivated to continue our work. So yeah, there are tough days. There are tough days. It's been a tough day. It's been a tough week. It has. But every day you do something else, and you're doing something good. You've impacted a community. You've helped a child. So, it was, what was it? It was Sunday. Sunday was a very tough day here. And then the coordinator of Humans Without Borders, which is the Israeli volunteer organization, called me up, and she said, there's a girl in Daharia who needs to get to Augusta, Victoria, and she doesn't know how she's going to get there, and she doesn't know if the border's closed. So, within 5 minutes, we had a car going out to Daharia to come and pick her up, right? And so the fact that Diana and I could work together, and together with Amy from Humans Without Borders, you feel that at least you're making, even if it's only this one child who managed to get to Augusta Victoria Hospital, and she was able to go across the checkpoint, and she was safe, and we were able to provide it a safe and free service, then it's worth it, even if the day is hard. And the day only gets then a little bit better. And I think that the more we can impact our own communities, and the more we can impact each other's communities, and it becomes in our community. And I think that, as Mohammad said, we have this peace building community that is also very supportive of one another. It helps us get through the difficult days.
True. Yeah, I think it's the same. Nowadays I'm traumatized from Instagram. Every time I open Instagram, it starts with something coming out of, because all the horrible scenes that we see. And nowadays, I don't even open Instagram. Every time I open it, like I want to close my eyes, right? If I'm going to see if there's a message or notification or something, and if that's how people feel. And I think people were depressed still in Palestine and Israel. So many people, and I think there are many people who want us to believe that the situation we are in is because of peace agreements weren't great at some point. That Oslo wasn't great, so this is why you are here. Camp David wasn't great, this is why you are here. It's the failure of the peace process is the reason why you are here. But the reason is war. It's as simple as that. That's why we're here in this situation. Even a pathetic peace agreement is much better than war. But I don't think there is such thing as pathetic peace agreement. If there's a peace agreement, that's a better future for the people. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we could have still saved so many lives. I think despite what the critics say, the reason we're here, there's leadership failure from both sides, whether it's Rozana or anyone else. The main reason we're doing what we're trying to do is not just to help the people or to keep peace, but also to look at alternative leadership in Palestine and Israel. And I think that's the main reason we are here. I agree with Ronit. It's very hard for the people personally. But I don't think how you could do this job in an easier situation or circumstances. I mean, it's the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as we know. It's one of the longest conflicts in our recent history. But I think we're lucky to be here. We're lucky to be part of the change that we really want to see. And I think that's the reason why every struggle, there are times where people feel in despair and they don't believe that it could happen. I think it was 5 years ago I was in Berlin and people were talking about East and West Berlin, and we were telling they never believed it could happen. Same in South Africa, the same with every other conflict. People thought it could never happen. However, we know it's going to happen one way or another, and always rationality wins. So that's what, I think that's why we still really have that hope and determination.
No.
Yeah, and peace will happen, inshallah. Meanwhile, thank you for the work that you are doing to bring hope to families of children who right now are in a terrible, terrible situation. Thank you. Thank you, Mohammad. Thank you, Rohit, for what you do. And thank you for joining us today. Salam.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have nothing more to add. I'm so moved. I'm just so proud to know you both, and your work is sensational. And please just keep strong, and we'll be behind you all the way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Walter, Sabiha. Thanks a lot.